My wife calls my nonverbal son a problem child, but his secret drawings just showed me she's the one poisoning him. For the first year after I married Amelia, our life looked perfect. From the outside, we were the picture of a happy, blended family. Amelia, my beautiful, patient wife, me, the loving father, and my son, Leo. But for the past 6 months, that perfect picture had started to fray at the edges. Leo was sick. It wasn't one thing, but 100 little things. A constant heavy lethargy that clung to him like a wet blanket. Sudden, violent stomach pains that would leave him pale and trembling. Mood swings that were far beyond the norm for an 8-year-old. The doctors were stumped. Blood tests, allergy panels, endoscopies. Everything came back normal. It's just a virus, one would say. Growing pains, another would suggest. The fact that Leo is nonverbal made everything 1,000 times harder. He couldn't tell me what was wrong. He couldn't describe the pain. He could only communicate through his tablet or through his drawings, and lately even those had become dark and withdrawn. Amelia, of course, was a saint. She was the perfect, caring stepmother, a pillar of patience and grace. She'd rub Leo's back when his stomach hurt, her voice a soft, soothing melody. "Poor little guy," she'd murmur, stroking his hair. But when Leo was out of the room, her tone would change. We'd be in the kitchen, cleaning up after another dinner he'd barely touched, and she'd lean against the counter, her expression a careful mix of sympathy and concern. "Honey," she'd say, her voice low and reasonable, "I think we need to face facts. This is behavioral. He's acting out for attention, but the stomach pains, the lethargy, I'd argue, that's real." "Of course it's real to him," she'd counter, her voice never losing its gentle, placating tone. "But it's psychosomatic. He knows it gets him out of school. He knows it makes you worry. You coddle him too much, Mark. You always have." And a part of me, the part that was so exhausted from months of sleepless nights and endless doctor's appointments, wanted to believe her. It was an easy answer, a simple solution. But another part of me, the father part, the part that knew my son better than anyone on earth. I had this deep, gut-wrenching feeling that something was terribly physically wrong. I just couldn't prove it. And every time I looked at Leo, at the dimming light in his eyes, I felt a gnawing, helpless terror. Amelia kept saying he was a problem child who needed therapy. I was starting to believe her. But what I didn't know was that my son was already telling me exactly what was wrong, in the only language he had left. Leo's drawings had always been his voice. His room was a gallery of his imagination, vibrant, detailed pictures of rocket ships and dinosaurs and our dog, Buster. But lately even his art had grown quiet. He hadn't shown me a new drawing in weeks. The first clue came on a Saturday morning. I was cleaning his room, dusting the bookshelf when I found it lying on his desk. It was a new drawing, a family portrait. There was me, a goofy stick figure with a beard. There was him, a smaller figure holding my hand. And there was Amelia. But her face, her smiling stick figure face, was completely obliterated, violently scribbled over with a thick red crayon. A brutal red X. I picked it up, a strange chill crawling up my spine. I took it downstairs, trying to make a joke of it. I held it up for Amelia to see. "Bit of a harsh critique, don't you think?" I said, forcing a laugh. Amelia's smile was tight, her eyes cold. "See?" she said, her voice sharp with a kind of triumphant validation. "This is the anger I was talking about. He's resentful of me. A therapist I was reading said this is a classic sign. She had an explanation for everything, a neat, tidy psychological box to put my son's pain in, a box that made her the victim. I didn't say anything. I just folded the drawing and put it in my pocket, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The violence of it, the sheer angry finality of that red X. Later that day, I was taking out the trash, and I saw it, a crumpled up ball of paper at the bottom of the kitchen bin. My gut clenched. I pulled it out and smoothed it on the counter. It was another drawing, the same family portrait, the same red X, this time pressed so hard the crayon had torn through the paper. I went back to Leo's room. I looked in his little wicker trash basket by his desk, and there, buried under some crumpled homework, was a third one. The same drawing, the same violent, angry, desperate red X. This wasn't just resentment. This wasn't just a behavioral issue. This was a warning. My son was screaming at me in the only language he had, and I was finally, terrifyingly, starting to listen. I hid all 3 drawings, tucking them away in my office desk, a growing collection of evidence that something in our perfect family was deeply, horribly wrong. I had no idea that the real key to understanding it all was still hidden, waiting for me in the dark. The moment that changed everything came a week later. Leo had lost his favorite toy, a small, worn-out stuffed dinosaur named Rex. We'd been searching for it all evening. "I'll check your room one more time, buddy," I said, trying to sound hopeful. I got down on my hands and knees, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the dusty darkness under his bed. I was sweeping the light back and forth when it caught the edge of something I didn't recognize. Tucked way in the back against the wall was an old black sketchbook I hadn't seen in years. I pulled it out, a wave of nostalgia hitting me. I'd given him this when he was 6, but he'd always preferred loose paper. Curiosity got the better of me. I sat on the edge of his bed and opened it, and my world just stopped. This wasn't a sketchbook. It was a confession. It was a testimony. It wasn't just random drawings. It was a storyboard. A comic book of his own silent, secret horror story. My hands started to shake as I turned the pages. The first panel was Amelia. She was in the kitchen, a bright, sunny smile on her face. The next panel, her still smiling, opening the spice rack. But she wasn't reaching for the cinnamon or the oregano. She was reaching for a small, unlabeled bottle tucked away in the back. A bottle I had never seen before. The third panel made a strangled noise escape my throat. It was a close-up of her hands, shaking a fine, white powder from that bottle onto a bowl of oatmeal. Leo's oatmeal. I flipped the page, my heart a frantic, wild bird in my chest. The next sequence of panels was a gut punch. A drawing of Leo sitting at the kitchen table eating the oatmeal. Then, a drawing of him curled up in his bed, his small hands clutching his stomach, his face a mess of jagged lines indicating pain. The last drawing in the sequence was of him on his knees in front of the toilet, sick, his little body trembling. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was gone. I flipped to the final page. It was a full-page spread drawn with a furious, desperate energy. It was Amelia's face, her smile a grotesque, exaggerated caricature. And drawn over it, pressed so hard the crayon had ripped through the paper in 3 different places, was a massive, violent, blood-red X. And in the corner of the page, a small stick figure of Leo tears, big, black, cartoonish tears streaming down his face. I just sat there, in the quiet of my son's room, the sketchbook open in my lap, and the entire foundation of my life, of my marriage, of everything I thought was real, just crumbled into dust. It wasn't behavioral. It wasn't in his head. And it wasn't for attention. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was poisoning my son. And now that I knew, I had to pretend I knew nothing at all. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely function. I took a photo of every single page in that sketchbook. My phone's camera flashed a series of silent, stuttering heartbeats in the dark room. Then I slid the book back into its hiding place under the bed, every movement slow, deliberate, a mime of normalcy. I walked out of Leo's room and closed the door behind me. Amelia was on the couch scrolling through her phone, and she looked up at me with a smile. "Find Rex?" she asked, her voice light and casual. I had to force the muscles in my face to move, to form a smile that felt like a grotesque mask. "No, not yet," I said, my voice sounding impossibly calm. "I'll look again later." That night at dinner was the hardest performance of my life. I sat at the table and watched her. Really watched her. I watched as she got up to prepare Leo's plate, her movements so graceful, so loving. I watched as her back was turned to me, her body blocking my view of the counter for just a fraction of a second. My internal monologue was a primal scream, a silent, roaring inferno. She's doing it right now. She's poisoning him right in front of me. But on the outside, I just sat there, my face a placid lake of calm. She placed the plate in front of Leo, a perfectly normal dinner of chicken and mashed potatoes, and she kissed the top of his head. "Eat up, sweetie," she said. I had to clench my fists under the table to stop myself from lunging across it. Every bite Leo took was a new, fresh stab of agony. I had to sit there and watch my son eat poison, because my one single, desperate chance at getting justice for him depended on her believing I was still the clueless, trusting husband. After dinner, I found her in the living room. I sat down next to her on the couch, took her hand, and looked her in the eyes. I delivered the words that felt like acid in my mouth. "Amelia," I said, my voice full of a carefully crafted weariness. "I've been thinking, and you were right." Her face softened with concern. "Right about what, honey?" "About Leo," I said, letting out a long, defeated sigh. "His behavior. It's not just a virus. I've been in denial, but you've seen it all along. I think it's time we get him that behavioral evaluation you were talking about." The relief that washed over her face was so profound, so genuine, that it was almost beautiful. She beamed, her eyes shining with what looked like love. "Oh, Mark," she said, squeezing my hand. "I'm so glad you see it too. We'll get him the help he needs. Together." I just nodded, my stomach churning. "Together," I repeated. The silent war had begun. I now had to live in a house with a monster, to sleep next to her, to smile at her, to play the part of the concerned, united parent. I had to watch her poison my son day after day, all while I secretly gathered the evidence that would, I prayed, eventually burn her world to the ground. The only person I could possibly trust with this secret was the one person who knew Leo's mind better than anyone. I was drowning, and I needed a lifeguard. There was only one person in the world I knew I could trust with this. Someone who understood Leo's silent language better than anyone. His speech therapist, Dr. Evans. She had been working with Leo since he was 3, a warm, perceptive woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel. I called her office the next morning, my voice a frantic, urgent whisper. I told her it was an emergency, that I needed to see her immediately. She cleared her schedule for that afternoon. I sat across from her in her small, sunlit office, the walls covered in children's art, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open my briefcase. I didn't say a word. I just slid the sketchbook across the desk and opened it to the first horrifying panel. I watched her face as she turned the pages. I saw her professional concern, the look she'd had 100 times when discussing Leo's progress, slowly morph into something else. Her brow furrowed. Her mouth tightened into a thin, hard line. When she got to the final page, the one with Amelia's face violently crossed out, she let out a small, sharp intake of breath. She closed the sketchbook, and for a long moment she just stared at it, her hands resting on the cover. Then she looked up at me, and her kind eyes were blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "This isn't a fantasy. Mark," she said, her voice low and steady. "This isn't a behavioral issue. This is a narrative. This is your son documenting his reality in the only way he knows how." The validation was so powerful, so absolute, it was like a dam breaking inside me. I put my head in my hands, and for the first time since I found the sketchbook, I let myself cry. I wasn't just a paranoid, overprotective father. I wasn't crazy. I was right. Dr. Evans didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. She became an ally. "We need to act," she said, her voice shifting into a calm, professional tone that cut through my panic. "But we need to be smart. She's already built a narrative that you're unstable." She pulled out a notepad. "I will write a formal assessment of these drawings," she said, her pen already moving. I will document from a clinical and professional standpoint that this is a credible and consistent depiction of abuse. It will be an expert opinion. It will be evidence. I felt a surge of hope so profound it was almost painful. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an expert on my side. What do I do now? I asked, my voice raw. You keep playing your part, she said, her gaze firm. You be the loving, concerned husband who's finally listening to his wife. And you get more evidence. You get something she can't explain away as a child's fantasy. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. Leo's drawings were a map, but I needed a photograph. I needed something a court of law couldn't dismiss as a child's fantasy. The next day, I took my lunch break and drove to a nondescript electronics store on the other side of town. The kind of place with blacked-out windows and a vague, buzzing sign. I walked out 15 minutes later with a small, expensive box in a plain brown bag. It was a Nanny cam, a high-end spy camera disguised as a simple USB phone charger. Small, black, and utterly unremarkable. Back at home, I plugged it into the outlet on the kitchen counter, the one right next to the spice rack. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire food prep area. Later that evening, when Amelia came home, I pointed to it with a casual, manufactured excitement. Hey, check this out, I said. My company gave us these new fast chargers for our work phones. You can use it too. She glanced at it, a flicker of mild interest, and then just shrugged. Cool, she said, and went back to scrolling on her phone. She hadn't given it a second thought. The trap was set. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I sat at my desk at work, a spreadsheet open on my monitor, pretending to be a productive employee. But on my phone, hidden under my desk, I had the live feed from the camera open. I watched our empty kitchen for hours, my heart leaping into my throat every time Amelia walked into the frame. I watched her make coffee. I watched her unload the dishwasher. I watched her make herself a sandwich for lunch. The sheer agonizing normalcy of it all was making me question my own sanity. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe Dr. Evans was wrong. Maybe it was just a child's fantasy. And then on the afternoon of the second day, it happened. I was in the middle of a conference call, my voice a steady professional drone, but my eyes were glued to the screen of my phone. Amelia walked into the kitchen. She opened the fridge and pulled out a container of applesauce for Leo's afternoon snack. My breath caught in my chest. This was it. The footage was chilling in its casualness. She was humming to herself, some pop song from the radio. She scooped the applesauce into a bowl, her movements relaxed, routine. Then she paused. She glanced over her shoulder, a quick, almost unconscious check to make sure she was alone. And then, she reached up to the spice rack. She didn't grab the cinnamon. She reached all the way to the back, her fingers finding the small, unlabeled bottle that I now knew was there. She unscrewed the cap, and with a few quick, practiced shakes, a fine white powder dusted the surface of the applesauce. She put the bottle back, stirred the powder in with a spoon until it was completely invisible, and then, with a bright, cheerful voice that the camera's microphone picked up with horrifying clarity, she called out, "Leo, sweetie, your snack is ready." I had to mute myself on the conference call. My hand was clamped over my mouth, stifling a sound that was half sob, half scream. I had it. The smoking gun. The undeniable, irrefutable proof. I saved the recording, my finger tapping the screen with a final, violent certainty. The loving stepmother was a monster, and I had her on camera. But I knew she was smart, and as she started to sense me pulling away, she would only become more dangerous. Living with the knowledge of what she was doing, while pretending everything was normal, was taking a toll on me. I became distant, quiet. I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Every loving gesture she made felt like a violation. And she noticed. She's a predator, and predators are experts at sensing a change in the atmosphere. She knew something was wrong. So she escalated. Her first move was to isolate me from my support system. I got a call from my mother one afternoon. Her voice was full of a careful, measured concern. "Mark, honey," she began. "Amelia called me. She's worried about you." My blood ran cold. "Worried about what?" I asked, my voice tight. "She said you've become obsessed with Leo's behavioral issues," my mom said, choosing her words delicately. "That you're not listening to reason. That you're not yourself." Amelia had gotten to them first. She was laying the groundwork, painting me as the unstable, paranoid one, the grieving widower who was losing his grip. The performance reached its peak at our family dinner that Sunday. In front of my entire family, Amelia, with a look of profound, heartbreaking concern, brought up my fixation on Leo's health. She talked about how my grief over my first wife's passing, Leo's mother, was understandable. But she suggested so gently, so lovingly, that maybe my grief was making me delusional. She used that exact word, delusional. She said I was being an overprotective parent, seeing problems where none existed. I just sat there, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork, a storm of pure, unadulterated rage building in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and play them all the video right there, but I couldn't, not yet. I had to maintain my calm exterior. I had to look like the reasonable one, the one she was so worried about. Later that evening, my own mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. She put her hand on my arm, her face a mask of loving concern that was almost identical to the one Amelia wore. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice a low, worried whisper. "Amelia's just so concerned you're not coping well. Maybe you should talk to someone." That's when I knew her plan was working. She had successfully isolated me. In the eyes of my own family, I was now the problem, the unstable, grieving husband, and the difficult problem child. And she was the saint, the patient, long-suffering wife, just trying to hold our broken family together. I was furious, but I knew I couldn't show it. The final confrontation had to be on my terms, in a place where her performance would be useless, and her lies would have nowhere to hide. Amelia, feeling confident and completely in control, delivered the final piece of my plan herself. She scheduled a joint appointment with Leo's pediatrician, Dr. Chen. "It's time they hear from both of us how serious this has gotten," she'd said, her voice a perfect symphony of wifely concern. "They need to understand that we are united on this." Oh, we were about to be united, all right. Just not in the way she thought. The day before the appointment, I took a half day off work. I sat in Dr. Chen's office, the familiar smell of antiseptic and sterilized paper filling the air. He was a good man, a kind man, who had been Leo's doctor since he was a baby. He started the meeting with his usual gentle concern. "So, Amelia tells me you're both worried about Leo's..." Outbursts. I didn't say a word. I just opened my briefcase and laid the evidence on his desk. First, Leo's sketchbook. I opened it to the storyboard, the horrifying, sequential proof of the poisoning. I watched Dr. Chen's face change, his kind, professional demeanor dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Then, I handed him Dr. Evans's formal assessment, the expert opinion that validated everything. And finally, I took out my phone. "And doctor," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "I think you need to see this." I hit play. He watched the video from the nanny cam, his eyes wide, his hand coming up to cover his mouth as he saw Amelia, my wife, the caring stepmother, casually poison my son's applesauce. When the video ended, he just sat there, in stunned, horrified silence. "My God," he finally whispered. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new, terrible understanding. "What are we gonna do?" he asked. And I told him the plan. My last call was to my parents. My hands were shaking. They had been so completely taken in by her performance, so convinced that I was the one who was unstable. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice firm, "I need you to be at Dr. Chen's office tomorrow at 3 o'clock. No questions. Just be there. There's something you need to see." The stage was set. The actors were all in place. Amelia was about to walk into what she thought was an intervention for her problem stepson. She had no idea the intervention was for her. And it wasn't just a doctor who would be diagnosing her. It would be the police. The exam room was cold, the air sterile. Amelia sat in the chair next to Dr. Chen's desk, a portrait of maternal anguish. Leo was on the exam table, listless, staring at the floor. I stood by the door, my heart a cold, steady metronome in my chest. This was it. Amelia's performance was breathtaking. She spoke in a low, trembling voice, her hands twisting a tissue into a shredded mess. She described Leo's erratic behavior, his unprovoked anger. She mentioned his troubling drawings, her voice catching with a perfect practiced sob. "I'm just so worried, doctor," she concluded, looking at Dr. Chen with wide, pleading eyes. "We need to get him help." Dr. Chen listened patiently, his face a mask of professional concern. He nodded, he took notes. He let her finish her entire, beautiful, fabricated monologue. When she was done, he set his pen down. "Thank you, Amelia," he said, his voice calm and even. "I appreciate you sharing all of that." He paused, his eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second. "I've had a chance to review Leo's drawings," he continued, his voice hardening slightly. "And I've consulted with a specialist. Dr. Evans, I believe you know her?" Amelia nodded, a confused look on her face. "Her professional assessment," Dr. Chen said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, "is that these drawings are not a sign of a behavioral issue. They are a cry for help." Just then there was a soft knock on the exam room door. It opened, and my parents walked in, their faces grim. Amelia's head snapped toward them, her perfect mask of concern finally cracking, replaced by a look of pure, bewildered shock. "What? What are they doing here?" she stammered. I stepped forward, my phone in my hand. "Amelia," I said, my voice shaking but clear, "I think you should see this." I connected my phone to the large monitor on the wall, the one doctors use to show x-rays. But it wasn't an x-ray that appeared on the screen. It was our kitchen. It was Amelia, humming to herself, her movements casual, as she pulled the small, unlabeled bottle from the spice rack. The room was utterly silent, except for the low hum of the computer. Amelia stared at the screen, her face collapsing in on itself as she watched her own hand shake the white powder onto the applesauce. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. My father just stood there, his face a mask of stone, his eyes burning a hole into the back of Amelia's head. The video ended. Amelia just sat there, paralyzed, her entire carefully constructed world shattered in the space of 30 seconds. Dr. Chen picked up his office phone. He didn't even look at her. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "Send them in." The exam room door opened again. And this time it wasn't my parents. It was 2 uniformed police officers. Amelia didn't even seem to register them at first. She just sat there, staring at the blank monitor, the ghost of her own crime, her own monstrous act, still playing in her mind. The performance was over. The game was up. And all that was left was the long, slow, and satisfying fall. The aftermath was a blur of blue flashing lights and hushed official voices. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, a hollowed-out version of the woman I thought I knew, as they read her rights and led her out of the exam room. The case against her was airtight. The video, the sketchbook, the expert testimony. It was a mountain of evidence she couldn't climb. She was facing a long, long time in prison for felony child abuse. My parents were devastated. My mother, who had been so easily manipulated, just kept sobbing in my father's arms, repeating over and over, "I didn't see it." How could I not see it? They were drowning in their own guilt, but this time, their focus wasn't on Amelia's performance. It was on Leo. They rallied around us, a fierce, protective circle of support, showering Leo with a love that was laced with a deep, profound apology for their blindness. The most important work began the following week. Leo and I started therapy together with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma. Our first few sessions were quiet. Leo would just draw, and I would just sit there watching him, letting him know I wasn't going anywhere. We were learning a new language together, not of words, but of patience, of presence, of rebuilding a trust that had been so cruelly broken. And a strange, beautiful thing began to happen. As the weeks went by, the mysterious illness that had plagued my son for months just disappeared. The stomach pain stopped. The heavy, suffocating lethargy lifted. He started gaining weight. The color returned to his cheeks. He started smiling again, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. The light that I had been so terrified of losing was coming back, brighter than ever. The poison was gone, and my son, my real son, was finally coming home. And I knew that our healing was only just beginning, but at last, he would have a chance to draw a new picture for his future. Months have passed since that day in the doctor's office. Amelia took a plea deal. She's serving a 15-year sentence. My parents are in therapy, working through their guilt, learning to be the grandparents Leo deserves. And Leo is a different kid. He's vibrant. He's energetic. He's happy. This afternoon, I walked into his room. He was sitting at his small wooden desk, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun, a fistful of crayons in his hand. He was drawing, completely lost in his own world, a small, contented hum coming from his lips. I walked over and looked over his shoulder, my heart a nervous, hopeful drum. For months after Amelia's arrest, his drawings were still dark, still full of shadows and angry red scribbles. But today was different. He wasn't drawing monsters. He wasn't drawing red X's. He was drawing us. It was a picture of him and me, two smiling stick figures holding hands. We were in a field of impossibly green grass under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. And in the corner of the page, taking up almost a quarter of the paper, was a giant, smiling, brilliant yellow sun. There was no third person. There was no red X. There was just us, happy, safe. He must have felt me watching because he stopped drawing. He turned in his chair and looked up at me. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he gave me a real, genuine, joyful smile. It was a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that lit up his entire face, a smile that said everything he couldn't say with words. And in that moment, looking at my son, my happy, healthy, and finally safe son, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that we were going to be okay. A parent's first instinct is always to protect their child, but what do you do when the threat is someone you love and trust? This was a story about a father's fight to hear his son's silent screams. If you believe in listening to the quietest voices, hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Unpacked. Let us know in the comments how you would have navigated this impossible situation. We're a community that believes every story and every voice deserves to be heard.